Hello everyone, this is Charlie from the Bloomingdale Public Library. Today we're going to be discussing basic image editing using a program called GIMP. This is only going to be an introduction to GIMP. There's a lot to learn, but at the end of the course I will tell you where you can find some more information. So let's get started. GIMP is an extremely capable image editor, often thought of as a poor man's Photoshop. GIMP is an acronym that stands for GNU Image Manipulation Program. The acronym does kind of have a few negative connotations, and there's been efforts to change the name, but the developers are kind of stubborn. GNU stands for GNU's Not Unix, recursively referring to itself. GNU is a large collection of free-to-use open-source software, including the Linux operating system. You can learn more about that at gnu.org. Again, a weird naming scheme, an example of developers' terrible sense of humor as well. Because of its popularity and age, there are ample books, documentation, and tutorials available for learning and reference. GIMP is about 20 years old, a little bit more than that, so it's extremely polished, it's extremely robust, it's extremely stable, and it has been used a lot over the time, and people use it professionally, people trying to mostly get out of Adobe's umbrella. So the number one thing to consider is it's free. So when we're comparing GIMP and Photoshop, GIMP is free and Photoshop is only available through subscription. As far as I remember, you can get Photoshop through a photographer's subscription for like $10 to $15 per month, or you can get the whole Adobe suite for, I believe, $50 a month, 50 or 60, I forget. I think there might be deals occasionally. Even before the subscription model, Photoshop was selling for, I think, like $600. So the free versus not free was always kind of a big gap there. GIMP is a less resource-intensive program, meaning it runs better on less powerful computers. So maybe if you have an older computer and Photoshop is kind of chugging on it, you can throw GIMP on there and it should run a lot faster. Photoshop has added functionality with other Adobe products. Using GIMP professionally is certainly something that people do, but if you are using the Adobe suite, Photoshop can go back and forth between other programs like InDesign and Premiere a lot easier than you can do with GIMP. Both GIMP and Photoshop will run on Windows and Mac, but only GIMP runs on Linux. And a lot of Linux distributions actually come with GIMP installed by default. Photoshop tools are generally more robust, intuitive, and powerful, and they're better suited for creating original content. And by that, I mean if you're starting with a blank page and you want to start drawing cartoons, you'll have an easier time with the Photoshop tools. Also, tools like Nudge and Dodge, if you know what those are, they'll generally give you better results in Photoshop versus GIMP. But GIMP is still very capable, and it'll still give you decent results. So professionals use GIMP, but Photoshop is the industry standard. So if you were intending on learning a program and going into the professional world, unless you're working for yourself, people are going to expect you to know Adobe Photoshop, and telling people you know GIMP will probably not look as good on a resume. So some other free image editing programs that you might want to look into. MS Paint. MS Paint is one that I use a couple times a week. If all you wanted to do was crop and resize images, MS Paint is probably the way to go. It's quick, fast, effective, and you'll still find it on Windows 10. And I think it dates back to Windows XP or perhaps even further. MS Photos, that's another one that's on Windows 10 only. It's got a few very effective options. Again, you can do cropping, you can do resizing, do some color editing. Not nearly as much capability as GIMP, but there's a lot there. It might be everything you need. You have MS Paint 3D, which is more just something you goof around with for fun. You can turn a flat image into something bumpy. It's cool, but again, more just something to have fun with rather than something you'd use to put photos in a photo album for. Another nice option is Paint.net. It looks a lot like MS Paint. There's just a lot more there. If you wanted to download that, that's https www.getpaint.net. That's another one I've used a bit in the past. And then there's View, which is small, quick. It looks like something that's from the XP era, and it might be, I'm not honestly sure. But it runs very quickly, and it's actually one that my boss is kind of fond of. You can learn more about that one at irfanview.com. So with all that said, what are we all going to learn today? First step is installing GIMP. Then we're going to get a look at the GIMP interface, just so we get comfortable with what's all there. We're not going to go through everything today, but just in case we take a wrong step, we'll know where we're at and be able to get back to some familiar footing. We're going to learn how to open an image for editing. We're going to crop, resize, and color adjust an image. I've grouped a couple functionalities together. It's because they all kind of are related, so we'll go through those as groups. How to use the selection, drawing, and painting tools. We're going to understand the concept of layers and how to add text. That's kind of a more intermediate skill, but if you want to add text, you have to at least be familiar with what layers are. And then finally, we're going to learn how to save, export, print an image, and go to lynda.com to further our learning. So how do we install GIMP? It's pretty simple, and if you've downloaded other programs off the internet, it goes the same way. I'm going to use Google Chrome. Open up a browser. And I'm going to go to gimp.net. Once you're on this screen, just click the orange download button. And that will take you to the downloads page. Click on the download GIMP directly button. You may be downloading a different version depending on when you see this video, but we're currently on 2.10.22. You'll notice that it's downloading in the lower left corner. If you're using Firefox, it'll be up in the upper right corner by a little arrow with a pointing down. So I'm not going to wait for the whole thing to download. I'm simply going to close the window, go to the downloads folder, and here it is, GIMP-2.10.22-setup. If you wait for the download, you can simply click on the lower left corner when it finishes downloading, and it'll take you into the setup. Just to show you what that looks like, double click on the install, yes, okay, install. It's pretty straightforward. You basically keep hitting OK, yes. It's not like Adobe, where if you try to download their free Adobe Reader or their Flash Player, where they try to force Norton or Google Chrome on you for some reason. But once you sit through it, it'll give you the OK. I'm going to cancel this since it's already installed on this computer. And you should be all set. So now that we have GIMP installed, we can go ahead and have a look at it. You can either double click on the desktop icon of this smiley little rat with a paintbrush in his mouth, or you can go to the start menu and find it. The start menu is in alphabetical order by default, and GIMP starts with a G. Depending how fast your computer is, it might take a little while to open, but once you do, you should be looking at something like this. And this is a blank workspace. I'm going to click on File, Open, and open a practice picture here just so we have a little bit more to look at. If you ever get an option to convert the color scheme, just go ahead and do it. And with everything here, let's go ahead and see what we've got. I'm going to click on the maximize icon in the upper right just so we can block out the desktop. So here we go. At the top left, we have a typical menu with the File, Edit, Select, which should be familiar, and maybe some of the others will be new to you. In the upper left, just below that, are the tools. The tools are stacked by type, so when you click and hold down, you'll see a whole bunch more options. So they're grouped by type, so we've got the fill options under the paint bucket, we've got the drawing options under the paintbrush, the select options under the lasso. We'll look at a couple more of those later in the course. Below that is the color picker, this set of squares with the arrow there. We're only going to look at the foreground colors today. So if you wanted to draw, what you would do is click on the foreground square there. And there are a whole bunch of ways to choose your colors. There's 5 tabs in the upper left of this window. I'm going to go ahead and recommend this triangle with the circle. What you would do is click and drag the little white line on the perimeter, and once you have the color selected, you can choose how much black or white to mix with it, and then hit OK when you're done. I'm going to X out of that for now. Below that, we have what's typically the tool options. So you'll notice as I choose a different tool, you'll get a whole bunch of new options, and I understand it's very intimidating to look at, and I don't know what most of them do myself, but we'll have a look at some of the more common options for some of the more common tools a little bit later. The best way to discover what everything does is just to go ahead and try them out. So if you're not looking at the tool options, you might have accidentally chosen one of the other tabs. There's actually 4 tabs of options beneath the color picker. We're primarily going to be looking at the tool options, and we'll leave the others for another day. On the right side, you'll have 2 more sets of tabbed windows. So the first one is images that have recently been loaded, but if we choose some of the other ones, we've got a collection of fills. So if you wanted to fill an area with water or leopard pattern, that would be the tab you'd choose. We've got a tab of fonts and another tab of brush options. Below that is layers and a few other things, colors and such. We're only going to be focusing on the layers and only just briefly. It's kind of an intermediate topic, but we need to talk about it if we're going to be adding text. So we'll cover layers very briefly near the end. So in the middle is where we have our image. As we move around, you'll notice at the top and on the left there are rulers, and you'll see a little marker that follows the cursor around so you know where you're at. It just helps for alignment and such. You'll also notice in the lower left there's a pair of numbers that go up and down depending on where the cursor is. And they'll even go negative when you go off the image. Those are coordinates for where your cursor is, and that can be helpful if you're doing something that requires a little bit more precision. Next to that is the units that you're going to be using. Right now we're using pixels, so along the left and on the top these numbers are measured in pixels. Next to that is the zoom percentage. We're at 12.5 because this image is actually very huge. If I set it to 100%, you'll see how big the image actually is. We're going to set it back to 12.5 for now. And I think that's enough to get us started. One other thing you might want to notice is on the bottom, you're going to notice some words come up sometimes when you're using things, and that's called the information bar. And it'll give you hints about what you can do with regards to shortcuts using the Alt and Control buttons. So with that, let's go ahead and learn some tools. 3 of the most common functions people perform on images are cropping, resizing, and adjusting the color. Particularly nowadays when you put images on the internet, if you were to put an image on a web page directly from your camera, it's going to be extremely large. Cameras take extremely large pictures. If you're looking at over a couple megapixels, it's not going to even fit on the screen. And if you were to adjust the code to help the image fit on the screen, it's still going to take up so much memory that the page is going to be slow to load. So let's go ahead and we'll start with cropping first. The cropping tool is this little square with the overlapping L's. And to create a crop, you just click and drag and release. And that is our cropping area. It's highlighted and the rest of it is dulled out. If you want to move the cropping area, you click and drag from the middle of the cropping area. If you want to adjust the size and shape of the crop area, you can either click and drag on a square in the corner to adjust 2 sides at a time, or as you roll over the sides, a rectangle will appear, and if you click and drag on that, it will adjust one side at a time. Once you have your content selected, go ahead and click in the middle, and that will perform the crop. You'll notice that we have this dashed line going around the original shape of the image. That won't affect any exported images, but if you don't like it, we can still get rid of it. So I'm going to drag GIMP away from the side a bit. I have recording tools on the side that are getting in the way, that's all. So in these list of tabs here, one of these is the Undo tab. I'm going to click on that and click on the base image. If you wanted to use a shortcut, it's Control-Z. I just want you guys to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to go ahead, click back on the tool options. This time I'm going to click on Delete Crop Pixels, select my content again, click in the middle to crop, and now you'll see that the layer outline is tight around the content. So again, I'm going to go to the Undo tab, go to the base image, go to the tool options, and we're going to look at some of these numbers here. One of them is the aspect ratio. So if you wanted to make a perfect square, you change these numbers to 1:1 and click on the checkbox next to fixed, and now when I click and drag, it'll create a perfect square. You'll see if I try to adjust the sides or the corners, it keeps its perfect square shape. If you wanted to adjust the size of the crop without trying to get it just right through dragging, you can actually click in the box and type in the size of the crop, and it'll adjust it automatically for you. If you have the aspect ratio still highlighted, it'll set the height and width automatically depending on which one you're choosing. So with our square around our couple, we'll go ahead and adjust a little bit. We'll go ahead and crop it again. And now, if we bring it to its full size at 100%, you'll remember that this is actually a very large picture. But let's say we want to put this on a web page, so we want to make it a little smaller. Let's make it about, let's say 800 by 800. I'm going to click on Image, Scale Image, and then type in 800 and hit Enter. And you'll notice when I do, it changes the height as well. That's because this little chain is locked here, and that keeps the ratio of width and height to the proper proportions. If I were to uncheck this little chain here, I can now set the width and the height independently. You usually don't want to do that though. So if I were to click, it's like say 100 there, click Scale, you'll see I get a distorted image. Whenever you uncheck the little chain link, you're going to distort the image. So I'm going to go back to Undo tab. I'm going to go back one step to the crop image, click on Image, click on Scale Image, and this time I'm going to leave the chain linked, type in 800, hit Enter, and click Scale. And now we have a reasonably sized image. So one last thing we want to do, I'm going to adjust the zoom a little bit so we can see everything. Last thing we want to do is adjust the colors. In order to do that, you go to the color menu option here, and there's a whole bunch of options here. I'm not going to pretend I know what they all are or that I'm any good at messing with them, but just to show you a few examples, we'll go to brightness and contrast, which is probably the one you're most likely to mess with. If you have like an old photo that's all washed out or just way too dark, you can mess with the brightness a little bit. And as you can see, you can do a little something with the brightness and contrast. Once you have it the way you like, hit OK, and there you go. Just to look at another option, we'll click on color, we'll do shadows and highlights, and you'll see there's a whole bunch of new options here. And again, I'm not going to pretend and I know what all these are and that I'm any good at messing with them. But the fun of it is you can just go ahead and experiment, hit OK, and if you decide you don't like it, you can go to your Undo tab and just go back one step at a time until you get to what you want. And that is crop, resize, and color adjustment. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the selection, drawing, and painting tools. Before we do that, I'm going to go to File, Open, and open another copy of our practice image. Convert. You'll see at the top here, it created another tab with the thumbnail. So it's kind of convenient. You can see what images you're working on. If you've got like 10 images open at a time, you'll see all their thumbnails along the top, and you can switch between them and see what you're looking at before clicking on the tabs. So that's kind of convenient. So let's start with the selection tools. I'm going to click on the rectangle select tool, click and drag, and you'll see it works just like the crop tool. You can click and drag on the squares in the corners to adjust two sides at a time, click on the rectangle to adjust one side at a time, click and drag from the middle in order to move the selection area, and all of the options under the tool options area are the same. So the positioning, the sizing, things like that. Piece of cake. Stacked with the rectangle select, if you click and hold on the rectangular select, you can see these other options. We have the ellipse select. In order to get out of this selection, if you just click outside the selected box, it'll go away. Some of the other selection tools, it's a little more complicated. What you'd have to do is go to Select and then None in order to get rid of the selection. So with the ellipse select tool, if you click and drag, again, it's just like the rectangular select, except now we have a circle cut out of the rectangle. Next comes the lasso tool. Well, it's the free select tool. I believe it was called the lasso tool in the Adobe suite, or maybe it was the Microsoft tools. With the lasso select tool, now when I click outside of the selected area, I start getting nodes. So this would be a case where I would have to choose select none in order to get out of the current selection. So the lasso select, the free select tool, you basically just draw your own selection area. So whatever you want, when you get close to the end, you see a little yellow dot to let you know that you're completing the shape. You release the button, and there you go. You got your marching ants around. The next one I think is really cool. It's the scissors select. Again, if I click outside of the selected area, I get little nodes instead of actually deselecting the area, so we got to go to select none. In order to get rid of the nodes we've already created, you have to hit backspace. And what the scissors select will let you do is basically trace out shapes. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the woman's dress right here. And as I do, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so it's easier to see. As I click, you might be able to tell it's trying to trace the shape of her dress. And I'm just going to do the bottom. Oops. I don't want to take up too much time here, but and once you get to the last node, you'll see a little pair of linking circles. Just go ahead and click on that, and that will complete the shape. Keep in mind you have to keep going either clockwise or counterclockwise. You can't start going one direction and then the other. You're going to make a mess. And if you do that, again, just hit the backspace button in order to go back to where you were at. If you wanted to try to improve the fit of your select, you can click and drag on the line and it will create more nodes. You can see it's kind of taking its time there because it's a little confused. But once you've created your shape there, I'm going to zoom out, and you've got your shape. So just to give a nice little demonstration of what we can do with that, I'm going to choose the bucket fill tool. I'll choose opacity, I don't know, something light there. I'm going to choose the color picker tool, just pick anything there, okay? And I'm going to click fill whole selection here. And now you see I've basically changed the color of the bottom of her dress. So that's a nice little example of how you would use the paint bucket and the scissors select tool together. I'm going to go ahead and select none. And one other selection tool I wanted to show is the fuzzy select, or I've heard it called the magic wand tool. And what that does is it tries to choose a shape just with a simple mouse button click. So if I click on the guy's suit here, it kind of does an okay job. Whenever you have issues with something like the wand select, or if you're trying to use the paint bucket in a specific color and it either takes too much or not enough, that's when you would adjust the threshold. So if I lower the threshold just a little bit and try again, you can see it takes a lot more of the shape. Something else you can do is select an area with the fuzzy select, and if you hold down shift, you can select a bit more of the shape. Of course, in this case, because his suit and the trees are both so dark, it all got selected at once. So you can mess with the threshold in order to get a better selection there, but it's a very handy tool when it works. It takes a little practice to get it to work the way you want, though. So I'm going to go ahead, select none, and let's have a little bit more practice with the paint bucket tool. So again, with the paint bucket selected, some of our options, we've got the FG color fill that will use this foreground color in the color picker. BG color fill will use the second color in the color picker. And pattern fill, if I select that, will either let us use an image that we copy from somewhere else or one of the images in the patterns over on the right. So if I choose the cheetah there, fill by similar colors instead of selection, since I don't have anything selected, now it's going to try to fill in any pink area with leopard. Let's see how it does. Not great. We can hold down the shift button to try to select more, but that didn't work out too well either. Again, I did an undo there. And again, that would just be a matter of messing with the threshold. Hold down shift, and we're still not getting a good selection. So without shift, again, we're getting piece by piece. But that's another way you can use the bucket fill. So in addition to the bucket fill, we've got the paintbrush, the pencil, the airbrush, and a few others. And they work exactly the way you think they would. You choose the color you want to paint with the color picker. Well, let's say blue, dark blue, okay. And then you can simply just start scribbling. So you've got a whole lot of options you can mess with. I don't want to get too crazy in going into them, but just to show an example of create a big angle, a big aspect ratio, and a big size. And now you see I've kind of got this angled, skinny, but fat calligraphy kind of stroke. So it lends itself to playing around with and practicing, just like with the selection tools. Just to show another tool here, we'll look at the airbrush. See, all the options basically stayed the same. We just got a couple extra at the bottom there. So I'm going to choose another color. We'll choose yellow, something very different, nice and bright. Okay. And again, ooh, it kept all the selections even. So with all of these options, if you don't have a steady hand, you can also just type it in. So if I type in 0, 0, we'll get our angle back. These little circles here will also reset to the defaults. So that's another nice quick way to set everything back as well. So we'll go ahead, set this up, and we'll have a look at the airbrush there. You Adjust the force. Make it darker or thicker, more transparent. Spacing will basically turn it into dots. I know it's kind of hard to see. But again, it lends itself to playing around. And again, also, if you wanted to restrict the area that you're working on, just draw a selection area. We'll go back to our paintbrush. And we'll choose another color, green, nice dark green, okay. Set everything back. And it's a little hard to see. But again, we're still restricted to the selection area. So that's a quick look at selection, drawing, and painting tools. Okay, so now we're going to have a quick discussion about layers and text. So I'm going to go to File, Open a new copy of our image. You'll notice at the top now we have 3 thumbnails of our 3 very different copies of the same image. And because it's so large, I'm going to zoom in a bit. And to add text, you click on the giant A there, the capital A. To adjust the style, you click on the picture of the font. I don't want to get too crazy here. You adjust the size here. 200 is good. That sounds big, but remember this is a big image. And then adjust the color. And we'll do something a little brighter. And then you can do one of 2 things. You can either click and start typing, and it will create a text box that's big enough to hold the font that we type. So hello world. So you see as we type, the box grows with the text. Or I'm going to click outside of there and drag. And now we have another text box. I'll start typing. Hello world. Hello again. And let's just scroll down. Hello again. You'll notice we don't see the 3rd line of text because the text box isn't big enough to display it. If I click and drag one of the corners, now we can see it. So again, if you have a particular space that you want to fit the text into, you can create a text box, and then you can adjust the font to make it fit just right. Or if it doesn't matter so much, you're not trying to fit the text into a particular spot, you can just click and start typing. Either way. So you may have noticed when we started typing, in the lower right, we've now got 3 layers where we once had 1. So we've got hello world again, hello world again. So if I click on the eyeball for any particular layer, that layer becomes invisible. You'll notice one layer is darker than the others. That's just a way of letting you know which layer you are on. So for example, if I am on this current layer here, and you can see the layer boundary around this set of text here, if I start trying to draw, you can't see anything because I am on the 2nd layer, and the 2nd layer is only as big as this hello world. And just to prove my point, if I start drawing inside hello world, it's gone. So I'm going to go ahead and undo what I just did. And I'm going to create another layer. This time, instead of just adding text to create a layer, I'm going to go to Layer, New Layer. That's fine. And I am going to choose a new color, say blue, okay? And you can see my layer over here. For whatever reason, it put my layer in between my 2 text layers. So if I were to start drawing on this middle layer, you'll see I'm drawing over one layer, but not the other. So I show you this because, for one, it's a nice way of being able to start coloring on a picture and then being able to erase it without destroying the original picture. So as you see, as I erase my blue streak, I still have the trees and the road and all that. So that's a nice way to try to edit a picture without destroying it. Another reason I want to show this is because if you start trying to use the paint bucket, or if you start typing and you can't see what you're typing, or you're trying to select something and it's selecting the wrong stuff, you're probably on the wrong layer, or the content you're trying to edit is not on the layer that you think it is. So if you pay attention to where you're at as far as what layer you're currently editing and what content is on that layer, you'll be able to avoid a whole lot of frustration. One other thing to show as far as layers go, and again, there's a whole lot. Most of the best tricks and tips for editing pictures involves using lots of layers. I'm going to draw, well, there I erased a part of the text. That's not what I intended to do. We'll go back to the paintbrush there. Again, I'm going to draw, oh, for heaven's sakes, draw my line there. If you find that something is in front or behind of something that you don't want it to be, you can actually click and drag layers around and put things in front of and behind of other things. So this is a very common concept used in a lot of other programs, including Word, Publisher, PowerPoint, the whole idea of layers. And it's something you should be familiar with, especially with text in GIMP, because GIMP will automatically put text on its own layer. And if you did want to merge the layers for whatever reason, you can go to Layer and then start merging layers. You can merge down, you can merge all, and things like that. When you go to export an image, it's going to flatten everything anyway, but we'll cover that next. All right, so let's discuss saving, exporting, and printing an image. First, saving. Just like most programs, you can do Control S, or you can go to File, Save, Save As. If you haven't saved before, saving will do the same thing as Save As and force you to name the project. So if I go to Save, you'll notice it gives us the name of the original file, which was practice, but then it adds the extension XCF, which stands for Experimental Computing something or other. Anyways, it's basically a GIMP project file. So the same way Photoshop has its own file that you can't really use for anything except for Photoshop, XCF files are something that you can only really use in GIMP. So odds are you're probably going to want to export this in a different form. But first, let's go ahead and save our project, which again is just a matter of going to Save or Save As, selecting where you want to save your project and clicking Save. So now if you go back and open that XCF project, you are going to have a little bit more information than you would from just a regular picture. You'll have information about things like layers and such. So if you wanted something to use in, say, a website or something you wanted to upload to social media for whatever reason, what you'd want to do is go to File and then Export or Export As. So when you click on Export, you can see instead of XCF, it defaults to PNG, which is a lossless type of image file. And that's fine. Usually I wind up using PNGs on our website all the time. The most popular extension you'll probably see is JPEG, though. So if you type in JPEG, it'll let you save as a JPEG. If you click the select, sorry, my My recording interface is getting in the way. If you click on select file type, you can choose one of a whole bunch of other options for types of files to save as. But again, JPEG is generally what you see on the internet. Other popular ones are BMP, PNGs, but JPEG is usually the way to go. So you select where you want to save to. The USB disk, in my case, is fine. And then click Export. And I generally just click Export again. If you want to familiarize yourself with the many, many different options as far as exporting goes, there's a lot to know. So one last thing you might want to do is print, and again, Control P should work just like it does in most programs, or you can go to File, Print, and you can print an XCF file even though you can't really use an XCF file in anything but GIMP. And that's all to really know as far as saving, exporting, and printing an image. So that's all I've got for our introduction to GIMP. Again, it was just a brief overview of some of the more common functions used for image editing in GIMP. It's free to download and try. I highly recommend you do so. If it can save you hundreds of dollars you'd otherwise spend on Photoshop, I think it'd be well worth your time. If you did have your interest piqued, if you've downloaded it, you want to learn more, I highly recommend going to lynda.com. If you're a Bloomingdale resident, you have access with your library card. I will show you how to do that right now. If you go to a browser, I've already got it open actually, but just to show you, go to mybpl.org. This is our website. If you've never seen it, you can come here and see what's going on. Go to Learn, Online Courses. The third one down is lynda.com. Put in your library card and PIN. And then once you do, you'll wind up on a screen like this. Go ahead and type in GIMP in the search. And you'll have a course on GIMP Essential Training, a much better teacher with a much more in-depth look at how to use GIMP. And there's plenty of more material out there, as well as books in the library. So again, thank you for listening, and have a good day.